Welcome to the Financial Flossing podcast with Ross Brannan, guiding dental professionals to a brighter future. Ross Brannan is a financial advisor who knows it's not just about your teeth. He helps dental practice owners protect and maximize today's cash flow to plan for tomorrow's cash needs. Find him at rossbrannan.com. On the show, he brings together experts to help dental professionals looking to make smart money decisions to grow their income, turn their retirement goals into reality, and improve their lives. And now, here's your host, Ross Brannan.
Welcome to the show. My guest today is Matthew Hernandez. Matthew is the CEO and president of Seraph Management. Matthew has opened and operated 35 dental practices in both Texas and Washington State, including 5 dental laboratories. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Hello, Russ. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. So you have a very unique story that's going to be very interesting and eye-opening to a lot of people. So you have opened 35 practices in Texas and Washington State. You are 38 years old. You've opened 5 dental labs. You are no longer a practicing dentist. You are now a dental coach. And so, Matthew, tell me, where did you go to dental school?
Well, it's actually funny. I started when I was young, very young, even younger than I am now, which I was in my teens. And so I went to 2 different schools. One was at the school in Ontario, Canada, which is called George Brown, and another school in Washington State called Bates Technical. So that's where I got majority of my training to be so basically it's a denturist is my background designation, and understanding clinical and laboratory and working with patients that need removable prosthetics.
So let's talk about what a denturist is, because I had never heard of one before I met you. And right. I'm sure some people have, but I'm sure a lot of people haven't. So tell people what a denturist is.
Yeah, so a denturist is I always related to like a mid-level provider. So it's an individual that has to go to a school of some sort in a recognized state in the United States or even Canada. And basically they educate themselves. They go through about 1.5 years, 2 years of training, and they take a state board. Their limited licensure allows them to practice directly with the general public to diagnose and replace missing teeth. So that's basically the thought process behind it. Now, in some states, there's only, I believe, 7 states that are legal for denturists to practice. Now, in Washington State, a denturist can practice and own his own office and actually see patients without having to have a referral. Basically, the state licensure there requires them to have extended experience understanding radiographs and being able to diagnose on their own. But they don't do anything with the natural dentition of the mouth. They just replace whatever's missing, and then they can make suggestions or referrals themselves for certain patients to go get care if they need it.
So it's a specialized niche. I'm going to call it a specialized dentistry. Some people would say it's not dentistry because he's not a DDS, but that's besides the point. But you have certain things that you can do, certain things you can't do. You specialize in those things, and you create a model where you built 35. And I really appreciate your honesty before, because you're like, no, 35 worked. So talk about what you built and how you built it.
Yeah, so I actually learned that from my dad. So he had multiple practices, around 28 of them. And growing up in the clinic, I had a really dedicated focus in life. I wasn't like normal kids. I was very introverted. So I learned from him. He had put me in positions of working with him chairside, writing chart notes, moving it forward with patient care and understanding what we need to do to condense the schedule. So when he had his practices, he ended up selling them all at one point, just decided to transition out and get into a different field. He got into the oil industry, which is pretty amazing. But for me, I had a lifelong passion for dentistry. So what I did was I created a similar concept. Back then, it was more of a DMSO type thought process before the DSO kind of became a cliche. So I would just work with DDSs, periodontists, prosthodontists. Those kind of work hand in hand with the denturist, just because the denturist patient's base basically needs surgeries and implants and bone grafts and sinus lifts and all those types of things. So I would work with them, and we'd open up practices, either myself and a colleague. So we put them in certain locations throughout Washington State. And I learned the hard way, to understand things like why you would open up in one location and not the other, and what, individual demographics will dictate in terms of your level of care to people, because it just goes back to revenue and discretion. So, yeah, I ended up opening up those practices with individuals. Some of them, we turned them into full-blown just general offices where we had the GP, we had the periodontist, and they would kind of migrate between the group. And the denturist was the same thing. So it turned them into full-blown dental centers, basically. And then the laboratory element kicked in as we started to grow, because I didn't want to have to worry about third parties, and I wanted to control that quality just because of my background. It's like I didn't want to just accept anything, putting in somebody's mouth just because it was cheap. So we had our own internal lab element, and then I managed and grew that as well.
So that's really, really exciting and really, really interesting. Now, what's even another wrinkle is you're third generation denturist. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's, my story in dentistry is funny. It starts out pretty young. I was actually in my teens. My dad was working on tribal land in Texas, had a practice there. And he had wanted to start practicing in other states, or actually in states it was legal, so he didn't have to work on a tribal piece of land. So he had told me when I was 13 that he needed me to help train him on how to educate enough so he could pass his state board in Canada, or his board in Canada, and then that license would transfer over to Washington. So at the age of 13 is when this all started, technically. So I was doing lab work and cleaning up and following him around, and then I was learning everything to do with being a denturist in Canada. It was a remote program. So basically what happened, he got me in there. We had to take a test. We went to a testing center at one of the universities. I think it was University of Texas. I passed it. I was at 13 years old. I passed this test. So I was in it with him, which was funny. But yeah, I remember going through grade school, studying orofacial anatomy, pathophysiology, head and neck anatomy. I get picked on by the kids, and my teacher's like, "What are you doing?" Like, I'm studying this coursework. I was kind of bored with school in general. So I was doing that at night. I would study during the day, do my normal class studies, go home at night. My dad would be working, and I would be educating him on all these ologies, basically. And from there is kind of how it started to grow for me. Just a love of patients and creating a stress-less environment in a practice, whether it's denturist or GPs, which everything kind of turned into the GP world for me, and just general dentistry because I loved it so much. So that's basically where I got my start, and started growing from there, working at every position in a practice.
So it seems like if you're able to grow it to, 35 practices, even if you didn't make it, you obviously understood systems and business and management. So talk a little bit about, your experience on operating a practice, and what have been some of your keys to success in that regard?
Yeah, so when you're working in that type of an environment, for me, in order to do that, I had to do it de novo. So they were all from scratch. There's really no practices that you can open, and I can't, acquisition an existing GP practice on my own. So I'd have to have a dental partner. So what I had to learn how to do was to create dental practices with nothing, literally from scratch. You open one office and learn how to ration. Basically, you create your own budget. You learn KPIs. You understand what's important for that specific practice with that team and that flow of patients. So I started creating my own Excel spreadsheets and figuring this out. This, again, was when I was in my teens, and I was, working with my family and then myself. But yeah, so you keep cruising along and you start understanding, okay, I want to open up more practices. How am I going to do it? How much do I need? How much is equipment? Can I get used equipment? What do I need to do for construction? I can't afford that. So how do I do that? So I ended up doing a lot of that as well. I did a lot of the build out, the design, the construction, if I needed to in some cases. So yeah, you really realize by making tons of mistakes how
the best way to learn.
That's the only way to learn. You got it right. And that's where, people like myself are very unique in a sense, because it's an investment of time. It's not necessarily money, but it's like I always tell people, if you're willing to invest time into it, you can get it the same way versus having to pay for it. But for me, time is so valuable. It doesn't make any sense to have to struggle and go through all those trial and errors when you have leaders out there in the industry that can help coach you and guide you to keep you from having to go through it and learn it in the same way, because it does something to a person. You've got to be very special to keep at it and not give up when things fail.
That's good. That's really, really good. So now you transitioned a few years ago from basically denturist to coach. So talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about what Seraph Dental Management does.
Yeah, so actually I created Seraph Dental Management back in 2009, and the goal for that was really to create it into its own DSO. What I ended up doing, because I started having children, it's like I don't want to have to be working 24/7 like I used to, because that was my work ethic. I'm from Texas, after all, so that's what we do. We get some hardcore work ethic down here. But Seraph Dental Management basically is poised to be in a position where we can work with existing practices, be it GP or perio or prosto or even denturist or dental laboratories for that matter, and work with the individual to find out what they want to get out of life. So having gone through what I went through and working way harder than I should have been, that whole philosophy of work smarter, not harder type of thing just didn't apply to me. I worked harder regardless. So what I like to focus on is helping people achieve success in practice and freedom in practice. That's the goal. Working remotely is one of the things that I started to do just due to COVID and traveling to locations. So people across the United States, they need services, they need support, they need coaching. With the massive issue in the industry right now that's going on with HR, that's another thing that I focus on because, again, I played those roles. I know what it's like to be a front office, a manager, an insurance coordinator, all those things, and the back office too, having been in surgeries quite a bit with a lot of amazing specialists. That's where I shine the most. So I like to do a lot of hand holding, growing people, creating relationships, and minimizing to get almost non-existent stress in a practice is my goal.
What do you see as the biggest challenge for dentists who become your coaching clients? What is the biggest area of improvement for them?
So the biggest thing I feel is letting go of certain processes. And I've been there. I've seen it before. Like a lot of the times you feel like you've got to micromanage everything because I liken it to dating, put it that way. It's like you might have had a bad date. And after that, it's like, I don't trust anybody, and it's the same when you're an owner in a practice. Like you might have trusted that one special person and they might have done something wrong, might have embezzled, they might have messed up the schedule, or might have gotten, a little irritated with other team members. It just did something to not, please the practice's goal. And then after that, they just end up doing it all themselves. And the reality is dentistry is not that hard, but it takes special people. It's literally your team that will drive you and your vision of your future success towards that direction. So I feel a lot of the times they just don't want to let go. And that's where I like to come in and show them that you can. And I'll show you how to get there because there are people out there that you can make accountable, but it just depends on understanding who they are and then nurturing that relationship.
How hard is it for people to let go? I mean, business owners are control freaks, many of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it's almost in the impossible realm, but it is something that does happen, especially with startup doctors. Like for me, I've done so many startups. I know how it works, and from scratch, it's a ton of stress. Does it have to be? No, but you have to know people like myself and other amazing industry leaders that are out there that can help coach you through that process, so you don't have to sit there and be on the Facebook forums or be online trying to research it and losing your hair and just stressing all the time. So if you start from scratch, for example, it's easy, especially if you have good mentors and coaches that can handle all this stuff, or a director, in the beginning, helping you get through that. But existing providers, again, it just depends. Some people, they can let it go if they know that they trust you, and it makes it easier. But one of the things that I think is missing out there in the industry is it's about passion. It's there, but it's not as prevalent as it used to be in folks.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the people and the way they struggle with certain things. And it's so funny because you're not taught business, you're not taught systems in dental school. You're only taught the clinical stuff. And you find the people who are the most successful, in my experience, are the ones who have figured out how to do business. Because ultimately, if you want to grow, you have to replace yourself, hire some associates, and you don't do dentistry, you just manage the business. And right. So, but a lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people struggle with that. It's interesting to say the least.
Yeah, a lot of it goes back to talent acquisition because the talent pool I think it's drying up. I mean, it's just one of those things that people have learned what the industry's like, and it's just harder to find individuals that have this background experience and then that drive to move you forward. And then you fast forward to today, and you've got different generations that are coming on board. It's a different thought process. It's a different work ethic. I mean, we're living in an age where people swipe left and right, and they're looking through thousands of different things that are hitting them on their phone and email. The attention span isn't like it used to be, where people would focus on one task and get it done. So it's another factor, but there's always ways around that too.
What exactly is a virtual operations director?
Yes, so a virtual operations director basically puts someone in place, i.e. myself, of a practice, whether you're in a startup or you're in an existing facility. And let's just say you're at a tipping point if you're in an existing office. And I've had plenty of conversations recently with some providers. Like I can't get past 1 million. I don't know why. I got all these practices and I can't get past 1 million. I've heard that one before. So the goal is to find out why. And it takes an individual, again, that has that background knowledge and experience of running big organizations like that, handling multiple, personnel. So what I do is I find out exactly what's going on. What do you want out of your practice? What do you want out of your life? And then go into detail about what are the KPIs in your practice? Do you know about collections and production? Oddly enough, that's a question that I get a lot of deer in the headlights. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, okay, now I know exactly where I need to focus my efforts, because understanding the health of your practice and specific indicators is what's going to help you make those decisions. So that's what I do. I do it remotely most of the time, again, just because of COVID, and that's how it's been. But it's worked so well for me. I can pretty much travel across the U.S. and be able to coach practices remotely as an operations officer.
And what are some of the more important KPIs?
So ideally, you got to know what your collections and your production is, and AR. That's one of the big things. I've had practices that are like, hey, I got over 500,000 in AR, but we're doing really good. Like, oh my God, are you serious? Do you know what that means? And it's like, yeah, it's not that bad. So ideally, it's like being educated and understanding the meat and potatoes. Do you know what you're collecting? Do you know what your write-offs are, your adjustments? Do you know what you're giving away? And that's another thing I didn't. A lot of doctors, even myself, when I was in the field, was how much am I giving away? Because I love to give and take care of people. And hey, free X-ray, free pano, but you add that up at the end of the month. How much did you actually give away? And sometimes it adds up to being enough to buy a car. So then you tend to not do that as much. So literally, it's just understanding those specific KPIs and dealing with that AR. Don't let it get out of control.
Yeah, that's a big deal. It's like, it just goes back to like what I've said before. What we said is you just have to understand the business side, the financial side. And a lot of people don't, unfortunately, for whatever reason. Maybe they haven't learned it. But the people who do, it makes a big difference. So what would you say, how many people struggle with the people management side of it? What's going on? How many people really, I've met people who want to sell their practice because they hate managing people. What's your take on people management?
Well, I would say don't give up. Not everybody is made for that. And when you think back on it, doctors are clinicians. In a sense, most of them are introverted. You're more of a scientist. You like working with teeth, and it's not really a people related type of a thought process. So when doctors come out, or any clinician for that matter, you come out, even hygienists, you have to interact with your team, and you have to interact with your patients. So some people just aren't made for that. And even if you are, why would you have to deal with that stuff? I mean, you can do it because you want to, but ideally, if you don't feel like an associate in your own practice, then there's some serious changes that need to be made. And again, it goes back to finding the talent, finding someone that can oversee that you can rely on. So that's another big challenge that I find out there.
So like, what advice to the average dentist who's listening to this right here, and maybe they want to grow, maybe they're struggling, what advice would you give to them?
Well, I would say that there is help out there. And it's one of those feelings that when you're in it, you're in it. You're in this massive tunnel vision. Just imagine you're looking through a cylinder all day long. I mean, you're looking through loops half the time. So when you do finally look up, you're exhausted. I remember going through days where we were seeing patients and doing surgeries at the end of the day. And then I'm just literally laying on the floor in the back going, oh my God, I got to get up and go look at the insurance. I got to go see what they did. But did they bill it right? Let me see if my notes were there. Did they send the referrals? It's just constant. So, I mean, you're working 20-hour days because that's your baby. That's your life. So I would tell them, like, there is people out there, but you got to understand that you have to make the investment, and the investment in that talent acquisition to help you grow your practice is for your future success. And don't look at it like it's a big debt burden on me. It's like, well, it's not, because if you do that, you bring people in, they take the stress off of you, and you'll watch it's like a flower. You'll just watch it grow. It's just almost like you're watering it, but you've got to make the investment to find that talent to get yourself to where you want to get to that next level.
What advice would you give to a brand new dental school graduate?
I would tell them that they can do it. You don't necessarily have to go out and join the DSOs or get into these big multiple group practices and make peanuts in the beginning. If you feel entrepreneurial, do it. You're going to be fine. You have to understand that there's a lot of steps that you can go through. That's another area that I specialize in, but don't shut yourself short. If you have that passion, you've got that fire, you're a good people person, and you feel like you're a decent leader, you don't really have to be much of a leader. You just have to be able to talk to people and look out for their interests. then get out there and look at starting up a practice. There's plenty of locations that you can either acquisition and get off on your own, basically, instead of having to go through these groups. But if you don't feel that and you do want to go through these groups, it's not a bad deal. You just got to look for good, DSO models that will fit your need. And they don't tend to run you ragged, basically. So I would want them to understand that there's options for you, but don't shut yourself short if you feel like you might want to own your practice.
Matthew, if someone wanted to get in touch with you or talk to you more, how would they do that?
Yeah, you can find me online. I've got a website. It's www.seraph, SerapMillc.com, Seraph Dental Management. You can look that up on Google, or you can call me personally on my cell. It's 214-223-1420.
Say that one more time. That cell phone number.
Cell phone number is 214-223-1420.
And last question. Is a Denturist model viable today?
So again, it depends on the individual. So if it's a denturist and they want to, they're having their practices. It is, and it's a very big need in the states that it's operating, because any clinician knows that's not a fan of dentures. Dentures are tough. They require tons of chair time, and in the grand scheme of things, you can generate way more revenue by doing the meat and potatoes, drilling and filling. Even implants and root canals. So ideally, yes, it is. But again, it just depends on how the practice is designed, what the providers are doing and how they're doing it. But they will take off a lot of stress off of any dental practice's plate by having to deal with the multiple repeat appointments that are necessary to make a denture candidate happy.
Wow, super fascinating. Matthew, I really appreciate your time coming on today.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure.
You've been listening to the Financial Flossing Podcast with Ross Brannan.
This has been another episode of Financial Flossing with Ross Brannan, guiding dental professionals to a brighter future. If you liked what you heard, consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. For more on Ross Brannan, visit rossbrannan.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by PAS, Guardian, or North Florida Financial, and opinions stated are their own. Ross is a registered representative and financial advisor of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS, OSJ, 3664 Coolidge Court, Tallahassee, Florida, 32311. 850-562-9075. Security products and advisory services offered through PAS, member FINRA, SIPC. Financial representative of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America. Guardian, New York, PAS is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. North Florida Financial is not an affiliate or subsidiary of PAS or Guardian. Arkansas Insurance License number 16139032. California Insurance License number OL10073 2022-143408 expires 9/24.